Good day, lovely viewers, and welcome back to the Anorak Review Show with I, your host, the Anorak. Before I begin today's review, I just want to give a bit of a quick shout out to those out there who celebrate Labor Day and hope they have had a very good one, had a good weekend with friends and family and all that, and as well as celebrating the last few days of summer and the beginning first days of autumn. And with that out of the way, let's talk some more about the Electric Light Orchestra. I've talked a bit about them over the course of the series in the past few months. I reviewed 2001's Zoom, an album that was meant to be a kind of comeback for ELO after 15 years of mostly dormancy and Jeff Lynne kind of moving on with other projects, and 1981's Time, of a very techno disco-y inspired album which many would argue was a turning point for Jeff Lynne and the ELO band and name as a whole. But now I think it's time for me to take a look at an album from their more glorious years, the mid to late 70s. When they first started in the early 70s, the Electric Light Orchestra were mostly kind of experimental and more explicit with their symphonic ideas and kind of Beatlesque roots. Eventually, over time, they eventually evolved into a kind of compromise where they melded these kind of elements together, with albums such as El Dorado, On the Third Day, Face the Music, and so on. And while they did sell some copies and had a few singles each, they weren't really reaching that big height yet. However, that would eventually change by 1976, 45 years ago, when one of their albums would not only sell 5 million copies within the first year, but was given several platinum certifications. And that album happens to be, fittingly enough, called A New World Record. And the cover itself is pretty basic, simple, and to the point, and is downright iconic. It pretty much introduces the classic ELO logo that we all come to love and would see reoccur over the coming years. The new logo itself in question was designed by John Koch, whom some would know as the creative director behind the iconic album cover of Beatles' Abbey Road. And it definitely shows. The logo itself has a kind of jukebox vibe to the aesthetic of it, which I think kind of fits the overall mood and kind of tone and music ideas that ELO represent. And judging by the city, it seems to be kind of in some sort of mirror reflection thing, considering the little buildings on the side, and a similar case in the back cover as well. So that's a little bit of a weird detail, but aside from that, it gives off a kind of grandiose premise that you'd come to expect from the Electric Light Orchestra, and this will eventually become a spaceship for the next album. But overall, good cover for a good album. And speaking of albums, let's actually talk about the music itself. Again, looking at each of the songs and see how good they really are. First off is Tightrope, and what would a good ELO album be complete without starting off with a very dramatic, ominous opening? And boy, does this song have such. Beginning with a slow fade in of this eerie yet striking, long, ongoing synth note before it kind of evolves into this ominous kind of dramatic kind of aria of synth and accompanying strings that kind of give off this feeling of nervousness and anxiety, as if the kind of musical equivalent of, well, walking on an actual tightrope. And just when you things couldn't get any more serious and kind of almost kind of intense, about a minute in, it kind of switches into a happy, upbeat, ongoing song with Jeff Lynne's lyrics and guitars
and just him singing about how we should get ourselves out of the gutter and just get ourselves out of depression and kind of stop worrying about things and just live life at all, to get off our tightropes and just throw down a line. Jeff really kind of catches off that kind of optimism right off the bat with the song, not just in his vocals but in the music itself, with his bandmates and the strings and all that. And even then, that dramatic melody at the opening doesn't entirely go away. It eventually comes back once or twice in the middle and at the very end, kind of bookending this kind of song. Almost how depression itself is something that isn't entirely easy to get out of. It would easily inevitably relapse in some way or another, but as long as we remember to keep our heads up, to keep our spirits high, we'll always find a way to climb out of it. And in a way, this kind of feels like a very summery song after having a very dark day or like a dark night or something, of just being low and dour. And you'll get to hear more of this kind of theme, not only for this album but also the eventual album that will come afterwards, which I'm sure many of you would know. But regardless, this is a fantastic opening track to the album, and being ELO, it should come to no surprise. Next is Telephone Line, and I'm sure this song needs no introduction, but the way it is introduced is very interesting. Aside from the very cute and very whimsical piano and synth melody, we also get this interesting sound of like a telephone calling or dial toning or like ringing on the phone or whatnot. And how this was accomplished is very interesting. Jeff Lynne and his crew were wanting to replicate the sounds of the American telephone calling. So to do so, they called a number from England to America to a phone that they figured no one would reach, and just kind of listened to that sound and kind of recall and record it. Then they attempted to kind of replicate that sound with the oscillators on the Moog synths, and that, which is very well done. In fact, had I not known about this, I would have been convinced this was an actual telephone sound calling. And even though it's not entirely authentic, it's still good at fooling and tricking the ears into believing that kind of sound effect. And the creativity doesn't exactly stop there. When Jeff Lynne does kick in with his vocals, which, beginning with Hello, kind of reminds me a bit of Hello by Lionel Richie and Hello by Adele. The way it kind of filtered and it kind of sounds, it almost kind of sounds like he's kind of singing and calling through the telephone, which is brilliantly clever. And on top of that, the music itself kind of gives off this melancholy feel that kind of accompanies the lyrics, how Jeff is obviously calling from himself to this person that obviously is not really responding. And I guess you can say he's been calling America? I don't know. But anyways, the song itself does definitely give off that kind of Beatlesque kind of feel and mood without having to plagiarize, obviously, any of the kind of Pacific tracks. It just kind of gives off that overall feel that you'd hear out of a composition by John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And you really hear that desperation in Lynne's vocals. It really hits you deep in the feels, especially when the chorus kicks around with the blue days and the black nights and how he's living in twilight, and hopefully not the Stephanie Meyer novels, but a more metaphorical twilight. You really feel that sense of enlightenment, that feeling of kind of almost reaching out and yearning for hope and kind of happiness. And and I don't really know what else to say about this song alone. It is beautifully symphonic, and if this doesn't jerk a tear in your eye, I don't know what will. Afterwards, we have Rock Aria, spelled with an exclamation mark because dramatic? I don't know. Anyways, this was another big single that was made off the album, and it's a very interesting choice to make a single out of. The way it begins, they hired an actual opera singer, a Welsh soprano by the name of Mary Thomas, who I gotta say was fantastic on this song. I'm sure she did some good work in actual operas in the past before her passing and whatnot. But anyways, she begins the song itself with a classic kind of typical, aria. But there's a bit of a sense of humor to it. The way it begins, she kind of started her singing a bit too early and just going oops, and just kind of wanted to do another take and start over. And then Jeff, being the humorous songwriter that he is, kind of recycled that little first take, that little accident, and kind of injected it into the very start of the song, just before the actual proper aria singing, which kind of makes it, like I said, very humorous, and kind of adds to that kind of tone of kind of not caring, do-it-yourself amateur attitude. But beside that, once Mary kind of fulfills her little aria bit, we then kick off into a classic 50s style rock and roll track that feels very reminiscent of the very early ELO songs, like their cover of Chuck Berry's Roll Over Beethoven, in which they actually do give a shout out to both the names of Chuck Berry and kind of actual classic composers like Wagner and Beethoven, even have a bit of a shout out to Beethoven, not just in giving a name drop, but also kind of a bit of a reference to the classic opening notes of his Fifth Symphony. And it's all integrated very well. And the lyrics themselves are pretty much self-explanatory. It tells a definite story about Jeff as this character who kind of falls in love with this woman who is an opera singer, while he himself is more of a fan of blues and rock and roll. So he wants her to be ready for his rock and roll. He wants to teach her about how to sing the blues and to do the rock and roll. And then accepting this offer, this opera singer kind of offers him an invite to the opera house at 2:45. And there, things take a bit of a twist. Not only does she do well at rock and rolling to the music, singing out the opera vocals in tune with the blues music, but she kind of teaches him how to do the opera, which is very fun and very an interesting kind of payoff to this short little sweet love story. And keep in mind, around this time, we had a band like Queen, who was already doing this kind of similar music with stuff like Night of the Opera and Bohemian Rhapsody. But I think ELO does great at integrating and melding together operatic music and rock and roll music, and they will continue to do so with stuff like the Concerto for a Rainy Day, specifically Mr. Blue Sky. And the way it kind of ends off definitely reminds me of something out of the El Dorado album, where ELO were kind of more experimental and kind of still kind of working on that combination of orchestra and rock music. But overall, it's still a very fun, bright, catchy, upbeat song, and if you're a fan of the opera, or a fan of 50s rock and roll, or both, this is definitely worthwhile for you. Side 1 ends with Mission, with, in brackets, a world record. So this is the world record, while the album itself is the new world record. Huh. Well, anyways, Mission is one of the more softer and more, I'll say, underrated songs from ELO. It seems to go back to the more melancholiness of Telephone Line or El Dorado, and its lyrics seem to support that, singing from the point of view of someone who's in this spaceship, who's been traveling countless light years across space and time and all that, until they reach their destination, the planet Earth, and thinking that there'll be a big celebration, or thinking that they'll bring joy to us. The ship just kind of sits there up there in space, just slowly orbiting and just staring endlessly at the sun, with this character, Jeff, of course, just kind of standing there looking down or looking upward at it, just kind of marveling and admiring such a lovely, beautiful looking planet, and how it makes one wonder, if we really aren't alone, what would life forms from another world think of us? Would they have similar feelings and thoughts and dreams like us? And it seems to have the recurring phrase of the mission of the Sacred Heart, which I have to say, which I might theorize could be the name of the spaceship itself, and I dare even say the spaceship that this song seems to be about would turn out to be the iconic spaceship that would appear on the Out of the Blue album, as well as various other albums of ELO, be it compilation albums or something like Alone in the Universe or From Out of Nowhere. That's why I think that's the name of the spaceship, the Sacred Heart. And it's a pretty good name for a spaceship. It has that kind of mysticism to it, this kind of mystery and kind of wonder of ELO, which kind of embodies the band and its music. And the music itself does have that kind of almost jazziness vibe to it, with some of the occasional bass, and even of course the typical backing strings. And Jeff himself seems to continue on that kind of that almost subtle despair in his voice, like with Telephone Line. And I guess it kind of goes into this sort of existentialism and just the feeling of wanting to bring happiness and joy to people, but being reminded not to interfere, not to be so quick to judge. Just stand back and watch, see how things go on their own. And you have to wonder, how far will it go before something bad happens and we have to intervene? And it's something like that. It does seem kind of deep and thought-provoking, and all in all, not only is this one beautiful, is underratedly beautiful, almost criminally underrated, and I think it deserves a better listen to and just overall appreciation. Side 2 begins with So Fine, a quick, peppy, artsy, funky, and all-around catchy song. It almost feels like a kind of proto-disco song with the way it kind of plays out. And the lyrics seem to be about two drifters sailing high and wide in the morning sky, and Jeff kind of singing about the feeling of yearning for satisfaction, fulfillment, and tranquility, and how he just wants it so fine. Just wanted to live a very carefree life without any issue, any problems, just wants to live life to the fullest. And boy, does this song feel like you're living it. In the middle of it, when it kind of has a little false ending, it kind of evolves into this almost weird yet very, very groovy mixture of kind of little electronic bleeps and blops, and these kind of almost African-esque drums, kind of again much like how Aria melds together 50s rock and roll and classical opera. This melds together the kind of African drums and kind of Western electronic music so brilliantly, and it kind of evolves back into that kind of proto disco sound, and just kind of ends as quickly as soon as it begins, which isn't a bad thing. It's always sometimes it's good to have a song that goes by on a quick pace and fills you up with fun, happy energy. And honestly, the way it ends is very, very probably one of the best transitions I've heard between any song in any music I've ever heard ever. The way it kind of ends, we have this long chord of strings kind of playing this last note, and it kind of slows down into this weird kind of devolving into just kind of near nothing until it kind of reach a certain note, which kind of kicks off the next song. And how they did that was that they played out the recording in the mixing tapes, and they just kind of turned off or switched off or kind of unplugged the machine and kind of let the tape kind of play out and slow down until it kind of halts out. And when it came to mixing and recording, they kind of waited until they kind of hit a specific note, which begins the next song, Living Thing. And like I said, that is brilliant and just creative way of transitioning from one song to another without having to pause things out or just kind of obviously have to fade one out to fade the other in. That is brilliant. And speaking of, the build up to Living Thing is just as excellent. The way it begins is with these kind of mysterious yet almost menacing Middle Eastern inspired strings that kind of put you on the edge and kind of just leave you at this uncertain and unnerving state until it kind of reaches this happy chord and kind of transitions into this very happy upbeat song, not unlike Tightrope, which is still kind of fitting since they both kind of sort of begin each side of the album. While So Fine was a kind of about yearning for happiness and tranquility, Living Thing seems to be about trying to preserve and keep that relationship and that feeling of love, calling it a living thing, and rightfully so. And kind of comparing it to the living people and animals we keep around us. And yes, obviously, some have thought this was about abortion and trying to be a stance against it, but Jeff Lynne himself had kind of debunked that theory, saying that wasn't intentional. It was just meant to be another love song, and that's still fine. I'd say so fine. But anyways, Jeff Lynne kind of goes overboard with the optimism in this song, just describing how things are slipping and sliding and it's all magic, strange magic in fact. And well, it is magic. Jeff Lynne himself doesn't have to explain it. It's just a purely magical song. And much like Tightrope, that kind of motif of those Middle Eastern strings kind of come back every now and then between the chorus and the verses. And each and every time, it still kind of get you back on the optimism scale. Especially with that recurring phrase of, I'm taking a dive. Almost making you think they're going to jump off and take a risk. And then the second or third time it comes around, I'm taking a dive, then is followed by on the slide. And the accompanying choir does help demonstrate how even if you do take a risk, you can still make it out alive and you can still pull through. It is, like I said, it is, for lack of a better word, a magical song. And some may see that as a bit too campy or a bit too corny, but that's part of the charm of it. It is a beautiful, guilty pleasure of a song, and it's no wonder this was made a single off the album. It is absolutely magic. After that, we have Above the Clouds. There's not a whole lot to say about this one compared to the others, considering it's pretty much the shortest song of the album at about 2 minutes and 16 seconds. But regardless, it's still a very short, sweet, and just all around another criminally underrated song from ELO. Following up on the very bright and happiness and joy that is Living Thing, Above the Clouds seems to kind of go down in a more dour approach, about Jeff kind of singing about how his love has gone away and all they can remember is just his fantasies and memories, but in a way he still kind of remembers. So it kind of feels like a dark twist from Living Thing, how he sang about not losing such a terrible thing like love, but in the end he eventually lost it. And Above the Clouds kind of continues on that, but there still seems to be some sense of hope and optimism, how he says that it'll be alright and he'll always remember the times they had together, the good, the fun, the love, the good times they had together. It's very sweet, it's very cute, and we also get a bit of the kind of a bouncy piano bit in the background, as well as some brilliant yet excellent backing vocals from the late great Kelly Grokut, who, by the way, as I think I forgot to mention, when the Electric Orchestra performed Rock Aria live, Kelly himself performed those aria bits in like a falsetto style, which is very well done and very ambitious. I gotta congratulate that old man to try and replicate the sound of a female opera singing. That takes balls, or Adam's apples, I don't know. It takes something. But back to Above the Clouds. It's short, like I said, it's very short. There's not a whole lot to say about it. It kind of comes close to being a filler track on the album, but it's still a very good filler. There's nothing too bad or too annoying about it. It's just there to kind of fill the length of the album, which is like 36 minutes in total. But regardless, it's still very good and still very underrated. After we manage to climb up the mountains of Above the Clouds, we get into the full-on rocking song simply called Do Ya. And this one has also an interesting backstory behind it. It was apparently written before ELO was even established. A song written by Jeff Lynne personally as a song for the band The Move, which he was in with Roy Wood and Bev Bevan, who would all eventually come together to form the Electric Light Orchestra by the dawn of the 70s. And during this time, they were still kind of more or less just as experimental as they were in 76. And anyways, Jeff Lynne decided to do a new version of this Do Ya song after being questioned whether or not his was the original and whatnot. It was apparently being covered live by another band or singer or whatever, so he did a new version of it, not only to kind of give it that kind of ELO style, but also to remind people that this was his song. It was a Jeff Lynne song. And listening to it, I can definitely tell that's so. Those screeching guitars and those thumping strings and the almost cowbell-like percussion, it just comes together to form a sweet and awesome rocker of a track. It's probably one of the most rockiest of ELO songs, I dare even say. And lyrically, it seems to go back into that uprising of hope and optimism after the kind of dourness of Above the Clouds. How he kind of found a new woman, and how he asks her, does she want his love in return? And over the course of the verses, he kind of describes all these all these things that he's seen in a kind of stream of consciousness. Most humously, pigs sitting and watching picture slides, which is kind of a funny image to paint in your mind the more I think about it. As well as even some clever foreshadowing, like saving you for a rainy day, which kind of foreshadows the concerto that will come in the next album. There's a lot of foreshadowing and very obvious ones the more I think about it. But anyways, it's a very good, hard-on, very good song that ends on that classic ELO operatic choir style, and you almost feel like you're going up to the peak of ecstasy when it reaches that climax, and it is worth it. And to be honest, whichever version of this song people would consider better than the other is up for personal debate and personal opinion. Honestly, I enjoy both for being their own things. This one in particular for integrating very well with the strings and slightly more modernized music and production, which still can be very good. And in this case, it is done fantastically, and I would like to see Jeff Lynne kind of take up more obscure, kind of lost tracks from his past and kind of help fix them up and kind of revamp them and kind of bring them back into the modern age. And so we close out this album with ShangriLa, which was named after a fictional location from the 1933 novel Lost Horizon by James Hilton. And boy, is this a song to go out on. It is absolutely and utterly bittersweet, this song, in both its lyrics and its music. It's simple, but it still gets to the point. It still reaches in with that feeling of sorrow and despair, but also kind of little glimmer of hope and optimism. Jeff seems to sing about how this person who he names his ShangriLa, almost as if is either an actual person or just the name of his home, and he's just kind of personifying it, or just the overall feeling of nostalgia, just kind of the embodiment of that, and how they've kind of faded away and just kind of gone, and he's been forced to live the rest of his life without it. And on that alone, I think many people can relate to that. We all have that kind of moment or that person or place that we feel a deep attachment to, and having to be away from it for so long can lead to some kind of impact within us, for better or worse. We've either kind of move on or we kind of obsess over it to the point of just being insane. And boy howdy, is this song capture that feeling, especially in that little Hawaiian-esque guitar bit solo about an hour and a minute and a half in after the first chorus. To quote the Beatles, it gently weeps. It just tags at the soul. And speaking of Beatles, there's obviously a shout out to the Beatles with the song and mentioning the song Hey Jude. And hey, I'm a Beatles fan myself, as I've probably demonstrated for my Revolver album. But like I've might have brought up before, there's also a bit of foretelling within this album, with lyrics such as "Raindrops falling over me, they hide the sun," and "She drifted on the rain, faded like something from the blue." How it kind of foreshadows not only the name of the next album, but also kind of the themes and kind of metaphors of Concerto for a Rainy Day, which is, I don't know if Jeff kind of thought and planned out that far ahead, but if he did or not, just utter genius in my opinion. And after like the third, second, or fourth chorus or so, you think it will start fading out as Jeff declares how he's getting out of love, as if he's kind of moving on and kind of blocking out all relationships after they all kind of come and pass and broken up, like Rock Aria, Living Thing, Above the Clouds, and so on. However, it doesn't exactly end there. There's a bit of a little cliffhanger, like the equivalent of a post-credit scene in a movie, where we still have that kind of ongoing synth and more of those kind of up and going strings, and just these tear-jerking choirs and Jeff echoing, declaring that he will return to Shangri-La, further kind of foreshadowing the kind of mood and music that ELO would go on to create. And it's just a brilliant way to end such an album like this. And overall, ELO's A New World Record is a superb world record. It is no wonder why it became such a big hit back then and remains well loved to this day, both ELO fans like myself and casual music listeners. There's no filler here. Each and every song here is worth a value. They're beautifully done. It's varied. There's multiple moods, but still kind of consistent with its lyrical content. And there's a lot to go to in this song. You can either just listen to it and just kind of feel good and just kind of go on with your business, or you could actually listen into it and kind of think deeply into it. It reaches out to many people, and that's what I love about albums such as this. It reaches out to many people, regardless of whatever taste you might have. And I'd say I'd recommend this, but let's face it, a lot of people have already listened to it. And all in all, I recommend some of the lesser known songs from this, like Shangri-La, Above the Clouds, So Fine, and Mission, as songs like Living Thing and Telephone Line and Do Ya are already popular enough that people just already know them off by heart. But regardless, it's still a beautiful, fantastic album, and it is a good example of ELO's music as a whole, as well as Jeff Lynne's songwriting. It is utter beauty and magic. Next time, though, we travel back into the 80s as we take a bit of a crash with the Human League. Oh, can't believe that actually worked. Hello, Mr. Mays? This is Anorak. The test is a success. The ground bridge actually worked. I wasn't fried into a bunch of pieces in some part of the galaxy. Okay. Is there a way to bridge me back now? Oh, okay. Alright, I'll wait. Alright. Don't worry, I'm patient. I'll wait. I mean, it's not like It's not like we're in some stranger's house or anything. Yeah, alright. Right. Call me back once you got it working. Alright, bye. Well, I could review something in the meantime. Oh, I didn't think to bring anything with me. Well, it's still a good thing I've filmed a review or two in advance. Otherwise, there'd be a delay or something.